Hello, 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 and welcome back to yet another draft video. So many announcements to talk about. First of all, I lied to y'all. I said 8 videos in 8 days, and I missed a fucking day already. So, not happening again. 7 videos next 7 days. Believe it. Uh, Also, thank you for the amount of love on the last video. I think it's my most viewed ever. Uh, you know, like actual not low light video. Um, Thanks for all the new subscribers, all the positive comments, all the likes, everything. Um, and thank you for 200 subscribers as well. Reached that recently. So let's get right into it. NFC South last time, NFC East this time. And honestly, I think it's better than the South. I think every one of these drafts is actually pretty solid overall. So let's get into it. Starting off with the Commanders here. Commanders, obviously, second overall pick. They used that to take Jaden Daniels. I'm gonna give that an A. Reason I don't give it an A plus is because I do think overall, in my opinion, Drake May is the better prospect. The reason I give it, look, it's still an A pick. It's still a great pick. The Commanders got their franchise guy, and they got the guy that they think fits in their system better, right? They got Cliff Kingsbury as the new offensive coordinator. So Jaden Daniels, obviously, we know Kingsbury's history with Kyler Murray and guys like that. So Jaden Daniels, look, I think honestly, he's gonna do well with the Commanders. I think they've given him some weapons and they had a really solid offseason. They a lot of change going on there. So I do think it was a great pick, and Jaden Daniels is going to work out. This is interesting though. Number 36, Jerzon Newton, Johnny Newton. I did not expect him to fall out of the first round, but he did. Commanders snatched him up. I gave this a B minus, but I also thought it was their steal of the draft. So how can their steal of the draft only be a B minus? Well, I love the player. I love the position they took the player at. But if you had to tell me one position on the entire roster, literally, that I didn't think the Commanders needed, it would be defensive tackle, right? Jonathan Taylor, Deron Payne, and they took a defensive tackle when you had a lot of other holes to fill. That's what I really don't like about this pick. And on top of that, look, you needed cornerback, right? You needed secondary. You had the opportunity to take a guy like Cooper DeJean, and guess who got Cooper DeJean? We're going to get to it later. A division rival got Cooper DeJean, and he was sitting there right there in your laps, and you passed on that to take a position you were already incredibly strong at. Now, look, I say all that to say Johnny Newton, I think, is going to do well in DC. Does this mean that Jonathan Allen is gone in the near future? Possibly. I think they signed Deron Payne to a big term extension, so he's going to be there. And I guess their plan is to have Johnny Newton there long term. So I can't look. This is a pick where I do think as the years go on, this is going to go higher and higher. So I have to start it out as a B minus because I really don't think it's going to help them much next season when they could have drafted, anything. Take your pick: cornerback, wide receiver, offensive line. Whatever you want to do here. But I would not have gone Johnny Newton. That's me personally. So I gave it a B minus. Then you got Mike Sanders still though at 50, nickelback, best nickelback in the whole class, undersized, right? But honestly, you wouldn't be able to tell the way he plays. He plays with a lot of heart, a lot of fire. I gave this an A plus. I definitely thought they were going to go secondary here with a first round pick, and I thought it could have been Tyler Nubin. He went before this pick, so they took a corner, and honestly, he might already be the best corner on the roster. Emmanuel Forbes has been a bust so far. Sanders still play the nickel, and I think if you have a good nickel, obviously, think Devon Witherspoon with the Seahawks, it improves the entire team. So I think Sanders still is going to do well. I think this is a great pick by Dan Campbell, instant starter, day one starter, and I like the player, and I would not have done anything differently. So I do think that's an A plus, and I think it's their best pick of the whole draft. Next up, though, only 3 picks later, you go Ben Sinnott, tight end out of Kansas State, and this is interesting, right? Because obviously Logan Thomas leaves. You got Zach Ertz as your only tight end. So yes, tight end was a need, but at 53, you know, this is a relatively, I'd say, weak tight end class. So I definitely don't think Ben Sinnott was worth it at number 53. So in the first place, I think it's a reach. I think it's a guy who, may compete for the starting job day one. He's a good blocker, apparently. But, I didn't like the pick. I thought it was their worst pick overall. I gave it a C plus though because I think he's going to end up being their starting tight end in the future. But you could have done a lot of things with this pick. Tight end was not a pressing need. So a lot of options with number 53, and they took a guy where I just like similar to Johnny Newton. I don't really think it's going to help you in the near future at all. And it's also a reach, and I might actually talk myself. I mean, look, tight end they're going to use him. Okay, so it's not a horrible pick, but I didn't like it still. 67, they took their first offensive lineman finally. Brandon Coleman out of TCU. This is a guy who has versatility. He's played tackle, he's played guard. Who knows what he's going to play in the NFL, but I like a guy where you can have the option as a team where to play him at. So probably going to start out as an interior offensive lineman day one. So I gave that an A minus, right? You got Jane Daniels. You got to focus on, protecting him and prioritize that. Pick number 100, they took Luke McCaffrey, brother of Christian McCaffrey, out of Rice, former quarterback, converted to wide receiver, going to play in the slot a lot. They already have Jahan Dotson, you have Terry McLaurin, add Luke McCaffrey in there. I like this pick, right? But do I like it more than I would have liked Troy Franklin, for example? No. So I don't think Luke McCaffrey was necessarily the best receiver on the board. So that's the only thing holding this back for me. Still, I like the idea of giving Jaden Daniels a weapon. It's just not necessarily who the guy I would have wanted if I was a Commanders fan. But still, nonetheless, I think he will do well in DC. Next up, we got Jordan McGee, linebacker out of Temple. At this point, it's just a preference thing here. I do think, you lost what's the name? Cody Barton to I think the Broncos. You brought in Bobby Wagner, but you still needed a young option there at linebacker. So that's why I gave it a B. Ultimately, this was like a fourth or a fifth round pick. You had to probably address linebacker at some point. They did it in the fifth round. Not much to say about Jordan McGee, so I gave it a B. Nothing too much to speak on with this pick. Next up, they took Dominique Hampton, safety out of Washington. I definitely thought they had to pick up a safety at some point. And I think, for a fifth or sixth round pick, this is pretty good value here to get Dominique Hampton. Led the Huskies defense in tackles. So that's a pretty good pickup. And then 222, Jamonte Jean Baptiste out of Notre Dame, edge rusher. Most seventh round picks, you know, not, guys you probably haven't heard of, doubt they're going to make the roster. But I think Baptiste does have some potential as an edge rusher. There's a lot of competition. They brought in a lot of guys this offseason at that edge position, but I like the fact that they did pick up somebody in the draft to compete for a spot. So overall, taking a look here, I would have liked them to address more the offensive line. I think both of their defensive line picks, especially Johnny Newton, man, I just don't, they didn't need Johnny Newton. They didn't need Ben Sinnott where they took him. It's I could have swapped around a lot of these picks, right? Like for example, let's go back here. Let's say instead of Johnny Newton, they take Cooper DeJean at 36. That's an A plus pick damn near. Instead of Mikey Sanders still, they take Christian Hayes, Instead of Ben Sinnott, they wait and take whoever you want at 53. There were so many talented players. And then at 100, you can say they still take Brandon Coleman. At 100, they take Jatavion Sanders or Troy Franklin, or let's say Sanders because they needed a tight end eventually. And it's just we can keep playing this game over and over where every one of these picks, I feel like outside of Sanders still, I can swap out and find a better replacement, a pick that made more sense than what they did. So obviously, I'm not a GM, but I'm allowed to have an opinion because sometimes I'm right. So overall, this is how the grading checked out. They got a 6.0 exactly, which equates to a B plus. And look, I'd agree, right? I think they got a lot of guys taking a look back again. Franchise quarterback, um, Johnny Newton, probably going to be a starting defensive lineman there for a long, long time. And maybe, maybe I'm being a little too harsh. Maybe he could play outside, inside. He does have some versatility there. I think he'll play between like 400 and 500 snaps as a rookie. So that's not bad. Sanders still, obviously, I love the pick, going to be a starting DB there for hopefully a long time. Ben Sinnott in the future probably is going to be a solid tight end. You hope Brandon Coleman's going to be a starting offensive lineman, Luke McCaffrey, slot receiver. And these last three picks, you just hope, right, that at least one of them is going to be a role player for you in the future. So Commanders added a lot of players. I thought it was a good draft overall, especially considering the fact that they got their franchise quarterback with the number 2 pick. So I gave it a B plus overall. Next, we got the Cowboys, right? And honestly, Cowboys draft was pretty boring because they took a lot of guys in the front seven defensively, took a lot of guys in the offensive line, so they didn't really have a lot of talking points, a lot of big name guys, if you want to say that. but I still think the Cowboys maneuvered fairly well, right? Tyler Guyton at number 29. They traded back, right? So they started with 24, traded back with the Lions. I forgot what they get, or I forgot what they got. I think it was a third round pick. But, Tyler Guyton, best tackle available, probably, right? He's a very raw prospect. They think he's going to start at right tackle day one. I'm not sure how. I mean, I guess you got to, right? Because they don't really have many options, but I don't love the idea of him starting day one as a tackle, but it's what you got to do. But if we're strictly talking about the Cowboys here, tackle was their biggest need, I felt like, and they took the best tackle available at 29. Do I think it was a bit of a reach? Do I think Tyler Guyton is as good? He's probably the sixth or seventh best tackle in the class. Like, for example, trading back, I probably would have just kept the pick and took a guy like, Graham Barton, for example. But they traded back, took Tyler Guyton. I do think it was a great pick, though. I can't really fault that. If you're going to trade back, acquire an extra third round pick, and take, in your opinion, the best tackle on the board, then you did your job if you're the Cowboys. 56, they took Marshawn Kneeland. Definitely was not expecting them to go edge rusher in the first two rounds. I could have saw receiver here, running back, even DB. I just really didn't think edge rusher, linebacker at 56 as well. I really didn't think edge rusher was that big of a need, but they did lose guys in free agency, notably Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler, guys like that. So they did need another option there. Honestly, have not heard much about Marshawn Kneeland. Um, so I can't tell you much about him, but apparently he was projected to be a second round pick, so it's not a reach. It's good value actually. So if you are the opinion that edge rusher was higher need than some of these other positions, then I could, you can justify it. And so I gave it a B overall. 73 Cooper Beebe, like this pick. I definitely thought the Cowboys had to invest heavily in their offensive line this draft, and that's what they did. Cooper Beebe, one of the best interior offensive linemen in the class. I think he's going to play center, because they lost Tyler Biotish and Tyron Smith, right? And you go out and get Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe. So I gave this an A minus because they could have went some other directions, but you know, I like the player, I like the position, I like the need it feels, and you can kind of wipe your hands and say, well, we picked up our offensive linemen. We did our job, and hopefully we can develop them once they get here. So I like that a lot from the Cowboys. Number 87, you took Maurice Liafo, linebacker out of Notre Dame. This is one I really don't like. And I understand the fact they needed a linebacker. You got Eric Kendricks, right? Leighton Vander Esch retired, so you needed a guy eventually. But you got DeMarvion Overshown coming back. I really didn't think you had to spend a third round pick on a linebacker here, especially when you needed a running back, right? The elephant in the room was that the Cowboys have the worst running back room in football, and they have not done anything to like. In hindsight, now I think they just re-signed Zeke, but come on, it's Ezekiel Elliott still makes this the worst running back room in football, and with every pick they just keep letting good running backs, get taken over and over, and there are a lot of great options at number 87, and you draft a linebacker that probably won't see the field much as a rookie. So I thought the biggest thing that hurt the Cowboys last year was drafting guys that didn't impact the team much, like Mozzie Smith, obviously, Luke Schoonmaker with their first two picks. That was absolutely terrible. And with this pick, you had a chance to draft a potential Pro Bowl running back, and instead you draft a linebacker that probably won't see the field much as a rookie, or maybe even as a sophomore. So who knows as of right now? But I did think that was their worst pick. Uh, Second set of picks here, we got Kalen Carson. I did think this was a steal. A lot of teams wanted, or a lot of fans, for example, wanted their team to take Kalen Carson in the third or fourth round, and he fell all the way to 174 for the Cowboys. I did think cornerback was going to get taken eventually with the loss of Stephon Gilmore. So, maybe he can slide in there, earn a starting job early. So I did give that their steal of the draft, but still, no running back is kind of ridiculous at this point. Number 216, they took a receiver. Receiver was also a need. Lost Michael Gallup. Don't really have any options besides CD. And you know, you probably haven't heard of this guy. I said the college is somewhere. I think he went to like Southeast Missouri State or something like that. Extremely small school. But the reason I gave this a B is because this guy is an athletic freak. I think he had like a 4.4 40 with a 40-inch vertical, right? So he's just a freak athlete. So the Cowboys take a chance on that type of guy. I respect it, you know. Small name guy, but electric athleticism. So I respect, taking a risk on that guy in the sixth or seventh round. These last two guys, offensive tackle, defensive tackle, best case scenario, their depth, but I don't think either of these guys are going to make the roster. So I did not grade either of these picks. So overall, right, we look at it, and the thing I like most about this draft is that they address their offensive line heavily. What I don't like about this draft is that I don't really think that they I don't really think they helped out their offense in terms of explosivity, right? Cooper, BB, and Tyler Guyton, long term, right, should be very solid starters for your offensive line. But next season, right, because you got an aging quarterback, you got a 100-year-old owner. Apparently, they're in win now mode. I really don't think this draft or last draft helps them at all in the immediate future. And what does help you in the immediate future is receivers and running backs, right? Because those are the easiest positions to transition, as we've seen. So by not drafting any of those guys, really, I think the Cowboys are kind of crippling themselves as you got to keep waiting for your draft pick to develop, meaning you don't really improve rapidly through the draft, which some of these other teams are able to do. So I did think the Cowboys had the worst draft in their division. I gave them a 6.0. It's a B plus, right? Because, Tyler Guyton, good pick. Cooper Beebe, good pick. Kalen Carson, good pick. No running backs hurts, though. No real wide receivers hurts, though. So, overall, I just even though it got a B plus, I'm very generous with the grades. I really don't think the Cowboys. A lot of people are going to say the Cowboys had a bad draft. I disagree with that, but it doesn't help them much in terms of their offense and getting Dak some weapons. Next, we got the Eagles. I'm gonna be pretty brief here. Well, not brief, but let me just cut straight to the point. The Eagles are one of the best managed teams in football, and they just nail the draft every single year. Because let's just break it down, right? At number 22, right? So all the cornerbacks fell because six QBs in the top 12. And it basically just meant that all the cornerbacks were available. So at 22, the Eagles had the chance to draft the first DB off the board, and they took Quinyon Mitchell. I'm not necessarily going to argue the semantics over who I thought the best cornerback was because honestly, I thought all the top five were great, like very good, right? I thought they were all interchangeable. I didn't have a strong take on who I thought the best was, but Quinyon Mitchell certainly postseason. What I mean by that is the combine, the Senior Bowl, he improved his stock dramatically, and everybody was saying he was a lock for the top 20. Everybody fell out of the top 20. So the Eagles had their pick. They thought Quinyon Mitchell was the best DB in this draft, so they took him at 22. I had to give that an A plus because they took, in their opinion, the best DB in the draft. And then at number 40, they traded back up to spin the block and take Cooper DeJean, one of the most explosive playmakers in the whole draft at any position, arguably the best DB in the draft still at number 40. This is an amazing steal. It's just an amazing move by the Eagles to double down on DB, and Cooper DeJean can play anywhere. Quinyon Mitchell can be a boundary corner. Cooper DeJean could play in the nickel. He could play safety. He's gonna see the field in some way. Obviously, a special teams monster. It's just the Eagles came into the draft with a need in the secondary, right? Because you got two aging corners with Bradbury and Slay, and they left the draft with no need at secondary. They are set up. Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, Keely Ringo, Eli Ricks, Sidney Brown. You're good. You're good. And you still got Slay, Bradbury, and Gardner Johnson as just veteran guys, and Avonte Maddox, I think. So the Eagles secondary is now lethal. Number 94, you got Jalex Hunt, edge rusher out of Houston Christian, small school guy. Um, I'll break it down here. The reason I give this pick an A minus, usually I really wouldn't, right? But the Eagles really, because of the rest of the picks they've made, they could afford. This is a developmental guy, right? It's a guy that's not going to see the field a lot early. But you look at some of the guys they have, and edge rusher you'd think is a really set position for them because you got guys like Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith coming up, but you do have some veterans like Brandon Graham, and I guess you're just taking a shot here on a guy who hopefully, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say hopefully, but maybe if Nolan Smith doesn't work out, he can take his role. When Brandon Graham leaves, he just gets more reps. It's a developmental pick. They took a shot here, but I gave it an A minus. I honestly, I probably shouldn't have in hindsight. I was just their first two picks are so good. They had a chance. They could afford to spend a third round pick on a guy that really won't contribute much at all for the first year or two of his career. Um, Number 127 though, this is where they took Will Shipley, running back out of Clemson. Honestly, I just didn't think of running back as a big need for them. Honestly, I don't know if I would have spent a pick on a running back if I was the Eagles. For example, you got guys like Cody Schrader who went undrafted. I would have just called him up and had him be my running back too, or just Kenneth Gainwell still. But they took Will Shipley at 127. Honestly, while it's still not a bad pick, right? I give it a B, but you know, I don't really think Will Shipley does anything that Saquon Barkley doesn't do. I don't necessarily think he was the best running back available. But he's still a good running back, and I think he will be their RB2. And obviously, if Saquon goes down, he's going to see a really big role. But I don't know. It's something about this pick where it's like I did not think the Eagles would be a team that would take Will Shipley at 127. Next up, though, we got Aeneas Smith, wide receiver out of Texas A&M, extremely explosive. I definitely thought they were going to take a receiver in the draft. I didn't know where, but Aeneas Smith, in the fifth round, I believe. It's good value for him. He's incredibly explosive. He's going to be a kick punt returner for you day one, so he provides value there. And get the ball in his hands. He's amazing after the catch. Makes guys miss so easily. So I really like that pick. I gave that an A minus. Maybe not the receiver I would have taken in this situation, but still, if he can be your wide receiver three, watch out, man, because he makes magic happen. 155, they got Jeremiah Trotter Jr., man. This has to be an A plus. It's the steal of their draft. Even you got Cooper DeJean at 40, and that's not your steal of the draft. It's insane. You could also argue Quinyon Mitchell's their steal of the draft, but if they would have took Jeremiah Trotter, keep this in mind. If they would have took Jeremiah Trotter at 60, I would have given it an A. If they would have took Jeremiah Trotter at 90, I would have given it an A plus. Fourth round, A plus. To get this guy in the fifth round, and it's not just because he's the son of former Eagles Pro Bowler Jeremiah Trotter. It's because he was a dominant player at Clemson, dominant in all facets of the linebacker position. He was a dominant college player, and the Eagles need long-term answers at linebacker. They already got Nakobe Dean. You got Devin White for next season. But the hope, right, is you got Nakobe Dean and Jeremiah Trotter out there in the future, and they're just a dominant duo. So to get him in the fifth round is an absolute amazing pick. And the Eagles fan were just throwing a fucking party when they made this selection. Um, Next we got Trevor Keegan, offensive lineman, not from Clemson. That was a typo. From Michigan, obviously. I like this pick a lot. I did expect them to go offensive line, obviously. I expect them to go offensive line earlier. They waited a little bit longer than I would have thought. But Trevor Keegan, a lot of experience at guard. Um, they're probably thinking he's going to take that right guard position over eventually because you got Dickerson at left guard. Um, you know, Obviously, if you're able to play at a high level on Michigan's offensive line, you just translate well. I couldn't tell you the specifics on Trevor Keegan, why he's only a sixth round guy or anything like that, but you know, to get a Michigan offensive lineman, an experienced Michigan offensive lineman in the sixth round for the Eagles developmental staff with offensive line, I gave it an A because it's going to be hard for me to believe that this guy just doesn't work out in Philly, honestly. Then you got Johnny Wilson at 185. I gave this an A plus as well. The reason I gave this an A plus is because I think the sixth and seventh round are meant to take shots on guys, right? Guys that have potential. And when we're talking about potential, when we're talking about prospects, project type players. You can't teach 6'6". That's what Johnny Wilson is. They're saying he'll be converted to a tight end. Hey, man, when you run out those sets that have 4 or 5 pass catchers for the Eagles, Johnny Wilson's going to be on that field, right? Because he just provides something. He moves like a wide receiver, obviously a massive wide receiver, but he has the size and frame of a tight end. Maybe not the size, the girth necessarily, but the height of a tight end, the body of a tight end. But he's a project because he drops wide open passes. That's never a good thing. So they're gonna have to work with him. But if this pans out, oh my God, people are gonna be saying they let the Eagles get Johnny Wilson in the sixth round. Incredible. But yeah, Johnny Wilson obviously fell just about as far as anybody with his draft stock last season. And then they got another offensive lineman, Dylan McMahon out of NC State. I gave this an A minus because they drafted a guy who has experience playing center, right guard, and left guard, and a lot of experience at that. Maybe honestly, now I'm looking back at it, maybe I was glazing a little bit with this. Like Trevor Keegan, he could have been an A minus. Dylan McMahon, he could have been a B plus. Jalex Hunt, honestly, he probably could have been a B or a B plus. To be honest, I was just high on the Eagles draft a little bit, so I acknowledge I probably overgraded a little bit here, but look, I still love how they handled this. Two offensive linemen, interior offensive linemen, two wide receiver. They take two shots on wide receivers. Two of arguably, think about this, right? There is a good chance. I would even say it's possibly a likely chance that the Eagles got the two best DBs in the entire draft. That's incredible. Just off of that, they couldn't be any lower than an A, right? When you come into the draft with a need and you leave the draft with the two best players of that need, I mean, come on, is what are you talking about? And then they also Jeremiah Trotter, one of the biggest steals in the whole draft, take two amazing wide receiver prospects. Like, come on, man, it's an A plus. It's an A plus. And even if you take my slight overgrading into account, I'd still have it as an A, right? So I honestly, it's probably the best draft in the league. I haven't gotten to many of these other teams yet, but just by skimming around a little bit, I do think the Eagles have a strong case. They were the best draft last season, along with the Texans, and this draft, more of the same for the Eagles. Amazing, amazing management by Howie Roseman. And finally, here we got the Giants here. Honestly, most people are talking about Malik Neighbors, and that's a great pick, right? I would have argued Joe Alt would have been where I would have went, but since he went at number 5, Malik Neighbors is the only option. Well, Rome obviously was there as well, but Malik Neighbors, a lot of people think that Neighbors, I'm not going to say a lot, but there are several trusted figures that have Malik Neighbors as their wide receiver one. I'm not one of those people, but I see why they have him. Explosivity and athleticism that is rare, even for the top 10 picks. I'm talking rare for any guy, any human. So, look, I think he's going to do well. He is a wide receiver one through and through. The potential is through the roof. Um, so there's no arguing. This is an A plus pick. 47, we got Tyler Nubin. Nobody's really talking about this. I think Tyler Nubin fell, right? Because I saw a lot of mock drafts that had him going in the top 30. I thought his range was between like 25 and 35. I thought for sure he would have been like one of the 4 or 5 first picks in the second round, but he fell to the middle of the second round. The Giants scooped him up. So you lose Xavier McKinney, right, to free agency, and you replace him instantly with the best pure safety in the draft. That's an A plus. They needed safety going in. They got the best safety at great value. So it's an A plus because it's a textbook pick. Everything about this pick, it checks all the boxes. Then they took Andrew Phillips. I hope that's how you pronounce his name. Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky, cornerback. He made a lot of good plays at the Senior Bowl. He's a little undersized, if I'm not mistaken, but you already got Deontay Banks. What was the reason here I give this? Oh, the Giants fans, and I agree here, you need to improve the offensive line. The Giants really didn't do that with their first 3 rounds here, which I disagree with, right? And I understand they signed a couple of veterans in free agency, but still, you need a high draft pick here to provide some more credibility because last season was awful, right? Last season was simply not good enough for the Giants on the offensive line. So I would have liked to see them invest in the offensive line early in the draft. They did not do that. I would have liked to see them get a running back with their first 3 picks. First 2, they knocked it out of the park. Number 70, I would have loved to see them take a running back. As far as who, I mean, I don't even care. You could have convinced me of a lot of guys here at number 70. Obviously, with Saquon leaving, you have a hole there. I know they got Devin Singletary, but I feel like that's a short-term deal. Eric Gray, who knows what he's going to be. So I would have liked to see running back here, but Andrew Phillips, I still think is a good player, which is why I gave it a B and not a B minus or a C plus. Next, we've got Theo Johnson, tight end out of Penn State. If Darren Waller retires, this is a pretty good pick, right? Theo Johnson didn't do much in college because Penn State sucks and they have no offense. So, he wasn't able to really showcase his skill set But from all accounts, this is a guy who's going to be a better NFL player than he was a college player. So I gave that a B plus. Obviously, still not a running back. Yo, yo, yo. Sorry. Mike dies every video if you're new here. You know to expect it. So Theo Johnson, still not a lineman, still not a running back. But if he's going to come in and replace Darren Waller, you got him, you got Daniel Bellinger. Tight end was a need if you're operating under the assumption that Darren Waller is retiring. So a good pick there, B plus. They took their running back, and I thought it was their worst pick of the draft. Tyrone Tracy Jr., running back out of Purdue. Why do I not like this pick? Well, I would have liked a guy here, and I don't know who was available. Honestly, I didn't really take a good look, but I do think there were some guys. I did. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but there were some guys who I would have taken over him. He's more of a gadget guy, right? He's a kick returner, special teams guy, converted wide receiver to running back. And he's very explosive with the ball in his hands. He can make guys miss, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you have a bad offense or a bad offensive line, I should say, bad offense as well. I don't really know if this is the type of guy you want, right? Obviously, the Giants know better than me what type of guy fits their system and everything, but you know, ask me, would I rather have Tyrone Tracy or Kamani Vidal? Kamani Vidal. Would I rather have Tyrone Tracy or Cody Schrader? I take Cody Schrader. It's just some of these other guys where I feel like you just put the ball in their hands and they're more traditional running backs. Tyrone Tracy, I see him as a gadget guy, a special teams guy, maybe line him out wide sometimes. I don't see him as a normal traditional, you know, bell cow running back, which I think you should have at least taken a shot on one of those guys if you're the Giants. Then they chose not to. Next, we got Darius Masao, linebacker to UCLA, led UCLA in tackles back-to-back years. Definitely didn't think linebacker was a need for the Giants going into the draft. Maybe I was wrong, but you walk in here if you're the Giants and you address wide receiver, which they needed to do. I give it a B plus, right? Because their first two picks were so good, right? Tyler Newwood and Malik Neighbors were such amazing picks that this draft could not really fall far, even if the rest of the draft was awful, this draft was not getting lower than like a B, right? And because, the Andrew Phillips picks were okay, and the Theo Johnson pick was okay. They walked away with a B plus, but I really didn't think they solved a lot of their problems, especially on the offensive line and running back. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm surprised they didn't draft anything on the D line, even though they went and got Brian Burns. I still feel like they could have got more help on the interior. I'm surprised that they didn't draft and a normal running back. I know Tyrone Tracy's more of an explosive, shifty guy, but you guys know what I mean. It's not what I expected, but it's still good. And with a 6.25, it's actually the second best in the division. So here's how everybody stacks up. Obviously, the Eagles was amazing, probably the best in the whole league. Giants at the 6.25, and the Commanders and the Cowboys. This is what I will say. I think an issue with my grading system is that it doesn't account for quantity, right? Because even though the Giants have a slightly higher grade than the Commanders brought in so many more guys who I think are going to contribute long term than the Giants. You know what I mean? So even though the Giants' grade is higher, I personally would still say the Commanders had a better draft, but I don't know. You guys let me know. Maybe it's just a flaw in my system and the way I do it, but next year I definitely need to find a way to take into account quantity, right? Because that matters. If you bring in more guys than a team that made slightly more efficient picks, I feel like that makes your draft. I don't know. It's a good argument piece, I guess. You know, an opinion thing. But thank you for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. You let me know. Obviously, the Eagles had the best, but besides the Eagles, who do you think had the best draft in the NFC East? Um, Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Have a great day.